just spoke with Donald Sterling on the telephone just moments ago. He is unaware of what is going to happen to him. He has not been notified. He also said that he really didn't want to comment on the record. However, the team is not for sale, and he will not be selling the team.
Not for sale. LA Clippers owner Donald Sterling has not changed his mind since Tuesday. Today's New York Daily News headline gives it to you right there. Donald Sterling set to fight NBA ban with lawsuit to block sale of Clippers. According to another NBA executive who's close to Sterling, quote, he's not going to sell the team. The executive said, quote, he'll sue and it'll take years to settle. TMZ Sports spotted Donald Sterling leaving a high-profile celebrity-packed Beverly Hills restaurant last night and asked him if he'd sell. Sterling remained silent. The NBA Owners Advisory Finance Committee held a conference call today to discuss the next steps and the possible removal of Sterling as the owner. Each member of the committee has voiced support for Commissioner Adam Silver. A statement released after the call today said the committee unanimously agreed to move forward as expeditiously as possible and will reconvene next week. And thanks to the release by the NBA of its constitution and bylaws, we have a glimpse at what arguments both sides could be prepared to make in any legal battle. Joining me now is attorney Michael McCann, a law professor and Sports Illustrated legal analyst who looked closely at the NBA constitution and bylaws for this story. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ari. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. We want to talk to you because this is where the fight is going. We've talked about why this matters. We've talked about the racism. But in a nation of laws and in a set of bylaws like this that binds a group of teams, this is where the fight's going. I want to put up on the screen Article 13 of the NBA Constitution here, which says ownership can be terminated if an owner willfully violates any of the provisions of the Constitution and bylaws. And now, in another article that pertains to owners, which they call Article 35A, the commissioner has the power to suspend for definite or indefinite period or impose fines or inflict both to any person who, in his opinion, shall have been guilty of conduct prejudicial or detrimental to the association. Bottom line, sir, can they prevail on the argument that here you have that kind of conduct?
Yeah, I think the NBA can, but I think there are some counter arguments. But from the NBA's perspective, the language is very sweeping, and it gives the league a wide degree of discretion, and it's a language that Donald Sterling agreed to adhere to. So this helps the NBA. The fact that the NBA has its own documents in place that Sterling agreed to, and that clearly give sweeping language that could include pretty much anything. I think the counter argument, though, is also important. Donald Sterling will argue that under Article 13, there are 9 enumerated specific offenses, none of which apply. There is the one that you mentioned, the willful violation of any provisions of the Constitution, bylaws, and other agreements. I would say 2 things. Number 1, where is the willful? Did he willfully violate? This was a private conversation in his house, taped without apparently his knowledge, perhaps taped illegally, shared possibly illegally with TMZ. Was this really a willful act if it's done in the privacy of his own house? Secondly, if in fact he can be thrown out under this very vague language, well, what other conduct could trigger that sanction? Does the NBA want to go down that path?
Yeah, let me stop you on willful, because you're making an important point for people who care about the resolution of this thing and whether the guy can get booted here. What you're saying is, even on a plain reading of this, if this was an accident, if this was supposed to be a secret, if this was private conduct, you're saying that Sterling and his lawyers can come in and argue, he didn't willfully try to do anything.
That's exactly right. The circumstances of the conversation matter. Not defending what he said. What he said was absolutely reprehensible, unacceptable, racist. We know that. But it was in his home. There is an expectation of privacy in your home. If you're in your home having a private conversation, how could you willfully hurt the NBA in that narrow context? It's an argument that his lawyers are going to use.
Then you look at the way that these bylaws, which we now have, govern player behavior. I'm going to put this up as well. There's a section in the bylaws which states that for a player to be eligible, quote, all players shall be of good moral character and possess qualities which will make them proper members of their respective teams. And this goes to the larger conflicts we have here and whether something good can come out of all of this bad conduct. And that is this document here that binds so much of the performance and the rules, like a lot of worker agreements, has a lot more rules for the players than for the owners. And you don't really tell me if you see this differently, there isn't the same kind of good, moral, comprehensive requirement of the ownership as there is of all the players.
I agree. There isn't that requirement. And that's also possibly strengthening Donald Sterling. He's going to say the language that's used to regulate the players is far more scrutinizing than the language used to regulate the owners. Now, the NBA can come back and say, well, you still are on the hook if you willfully violate any terms or provision.
So let me ask you the
policy. We know that prejudicial language can trigger that.
Let me jump in and ask you, Michael, I want to ask you...
The rules are not the same. They're tougher for players.
They're not the same, and that's why I ask you. The policy question is, we say, what should we do about all this? Do you think they should actually have rules here that are tougher on the owners going forward?
Sure. I mean, I think why treat the labor harsher than the management when the management, in this case the owner, is the one that did the worst thing possible, right? No player has caused an international crisis for the NBA. No player has caused the President of the United States, while on a trip abroad, to talk about him. It was an owner of a team. I think it definitely is a soul-searching moment for the league to consider the rules that they use to govern owners, to govern the conduct and words of the owners. And look, if we're going to treat players this way, make sure owners agree to play by the same set of rules.
Well put, Michael McCann. Thank you for joining us, giving us your expertise. And coming up, a lawsuit over